Hello class, and welcome to the second module of lighting and lighting efficiencies. This section I'll be talking about brightness, or luminance and illuminance of different lights. So in the last section, we went over wavelengths, right? Light is an electromagnetic wave, and the wavelength affects the color, sometimes referred to as the temperature of the light. This time I'm going to be concentrating on the amplitude, or the amount of power or brightness that can be emitted by artificial light. So back in the days before we had light bulbs and Edison and all of that, we had to rely on candles. Candles are great until they burn down a building, which isn't so good. Also, any like paraffin wax that emits carcinogens, and those aren't things you really want to be breathing inside, and they're not particularly bright. They don't give off a whole lot of light. So thankfully, we've moved on to light bulbs and other ways of producing light. Unfortunately, our terminology is still kind of stuck in those medieval days, and we measure the amount of visible energy emitted from a light source in terms of candelas. You can probably figure out where we derive that from. And this is, think of this kind of like a watt. But very specific to the visible spectrum. It's a measure of radiant intensity emitted in a particular direction. So a candela, it's measured per steradian, or coming off of a particular angle from a point of light. That's great. It's nice to know where all those candelas are going out to, but it's more helpful for us to figure out exactly how much light is going to be coming off of this light bulb total, not just in one particular direction. So we measure that in terms of lumens. Lumens is a way to quantify the light emitted in all directions from a particular source. When we moved on to incandescent light bulbs, we'd run some electricity through this tungsten wire. If you just ran, say, 15 watts through here, you'd get some visible light out of it, but it would be rather dim. The more energy you would actually run through this, the brighter the light would get. And so the two have kind of become conflated over time and have kind of seeped into our terminology. And people now associate a certain wattage with a certain level of brightness. Problem is, this just refers to how much energy is being drawn by this particular bulb. This one I'm holding is 200 watts, so it would be very bright. But that doesn't mean 200 watts of visible energy is being emitted. It means 200 watts of electricity is being drawn in, and what is emitted might be some visible light, as well as some heat, and maybe some other electromagnetic radiation that is outside of the visible spectrum. So if you're looking at, say, a 75-watt light bulb, people might have a general sense of, oh, I think I know about how bright that is, but it's much more scientific to discuss that in terms of lumens. But since incandescents have been around so long, yeah, we've kind of paired one with the other. Department of Energy is really trying to make a better division of those two, because now we have technologies like compact fluorescence or LEDs, where we can get more lumens, more brightness, using fewer watts to do so. So back in the day, if you were looking for, say, a 15-watt light bulb or a 40-watt light bulb, something on the dimmer side, you'd be looking in the 300 to 450 lumen range. And if you want a really bright light in the 100-watt to 150-watt range, you'd be looking for something in the 2000 lumen range. But remember that lumens, once again, they're displayed in all directions, right? So you've got one source here, this little tungsten wire, and the number of lumens coming out of this bulb is going to be emitted maybe a little bit down, up, out, all over the place, whereas this might have the same number of lumens, this little halogen, but all of it is going to be focused in a particular direction. Another example of this demonstration might be focusing like a mag light. So in the video here, the bulb in this particular situation, it's not changing. The batteries aren't drawing more or less power, but the spot on the wall is appearing brighter or dimmer depending on the concentration of those beams. So once again, same number of lumens, same number of power is being emitted, but that focus is a little bit different. And that's something that's really important for us to know, particularly if we're going to be looking at, can you read this paper given this amount of light? You could install a bulb that has so many lumens and say you should be happy, but if those lumens are being scattered everywhere, it's not that helpful. You really want to know how much light is being cast on this particular surface so that you can actually read it. So that we measure in terms of foot candles. Guess where those units came from. Originally it is one candle emits a certain amount of brightness to a surface that is 1 foot away, or it is 1 lumen per square foot. That is expressed in a metric that we call illuminance. So illuminance refers to the strength of light that is falling on a particular surface. And that's measured in terms of lumens per square foot candles, thanks Imperial System. If we want to go for international units, which I much prefer and will be referring to from now on, that would be in terms of lumens per meter squared, or 1 lux. And I like the term lux because it calls back to radiant intensity, right? Radiant flux. Except instead of looking at all electromagnetic flux passing through this particular section, we're looking at just the visible spectrum of energy that is being cast on a surface in terms of lumens per square meter. Foot candles and lumens are related just in terms of the square foot versus square meter. So those two can be translated pretty well. So luminance, illuminance is great, the amount of light falling on a surface, but we're also concerned with the amount that is reflected off of a surface. I'll come back to that slide in a moment, but to illustrate the difference, I'm going to turn on this lamp in here. All right. So I've just added a little bit of light to the room. Now things should be pretty set, and the camera should be kind of focused on me making sure that there's some color contrast. I'm going to take, this is the closest thing I could find in our lab to a mirror, some reflective blinds, and bounce this light around a little bit, see if I can reflect it directly onto the camera. So if you were trying to, say, read something directly over my shoulder, it would eventually get a little bit harder and dimmer depending on how well this camera is actually adjusting. If I take it away, maybe the picture appears a little bit brighter. Or if you're trying to focus your iPhone camera and there's that spot of glare, right, and everything else appears really dark, that is an effect of luminance, or light that is being reflected off of a particular object. And to the human eye, that makes everything else look a lot dimmer, which isn't so good. So it's important to know both of these things, both the illuminance, the amount of light that is falling down onto a particular surface, versus luminance, or what is being reflected off of that surface. Because if you were to have one light bulb, same light bulb, 2 different rooms, one room is painted entirely black and the other is painted entirely white, one of those is going to appear much more dim to us than the other. Second example of illuminance versus luminance, here I've got my pad of paper here. I'm going to turn my light on, and the amount of light coming off of here does not change, right? I'm not doing anything to this light bulb. But you've got a very, what we would call bright surface, right, on this white paper, because a lot of light is being reflected off of it. So the illuminance here is constant. If I flip it over to black, illuminance is the same. but one appears much brighter to us than the other, and that is the luminance, or light that is reflected or emitted off of this paper. And as engineers, we don't want to walk into a space and say, you have plenty of lumens, be happy, right? It's much more about the human or the lived experience. We want to create comfortable, visually delightful spaces to live and work in. And so you have to take both of these into account. Oftentimes, it's very easy to measure the illuminance. We walk around with a light meter and we measure how much light is falling on a particular surface, and that's helpful, but it's also important to understand the importance of luminance, or if there might be glare in a space, which our eye will focus on and protect and make everything else appear dim because we don't want to overexpose our pupils. All right, so there's kind of an overview of brightness and the actual scientific terms that we went over. So the strength of visible light that's emitted, we measure that in terms of candelas or lumens, and that's how we shop for light bulbs now. So this little CFL here, it only draws 42 watts, but emits 3,200 lumens, whereas this little halogen lamp here, it draws 75 watts, so more watts than the CFL, but it only emits 1,000 lumens. But these are a little bit different, right? Because one might be highly focused, in which case we want to be measuring the illuminance, or what this light is actually going to be focused on, the light hitting a surface, as well as make sure we don't have any glare in the space, or luminance, which is light reflected off of a surface. So hope that gives you a decent recap and some new terms to use to actually quantify the visual comfort of a space. Thanks, and see you next lecture.